I needed a break from the city. That's why I rented the cabin. It was a small A-frame structure deep in the forests of Oregon, miles away from the nearest cell tower. The listing said it was the perfect place to find yourself. If I had known how literal that was, I never would have booked it. The first 2 days were peaceful. I chopped wood, I read books, I drank whiskey by the fire. But on the third night, a heavy snowstorm rolled in. The temperature dropped and the wind began to howl through the trees. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't on the front door, it was on the back window, the one facing the dense black forest. I froze. No one could be out there. The snow was 2 feet deep, and there were no other cabins for 20 miles. I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the window. I shined the beam into the dark. At first, I saw nothing but falling snow. But then, the beam caught something standing at the tree line, about 50 yards away. It was a man. He was standing perfectly still, facing the cabin. I squinted, trying to make out his face. My stomach dropped. He was wearing a red flannel shirt and a gray beanie. I looked down at my own chest. I was wearing a red flannel shirt. I reached up and touched my head. I was wearing a gray beanie. "Hello?" I shouted through the glass, my voice trembling. "Do you need help?" The man didn't move, but then he opened his mouth. He didn't speak. He mimicked the exact sound I just made. "Hello? Do you need help?" It wasn't an echo. It was my voice, my exact pitch, my exact tone, but it was coming from his throat. I stepped back, terrified. I drew the curtains shut and locked the window. "It's just the wind," I told myself. "You've been alone too long. You're hearing things." I went back to the living room and sat by the fire, clutching a fire poker. 10 minutes later, I heard the knocking again. But this time, it wasn't on the window. It was coming from the roof. Knock, knock, knock. And then I heard my own voice, loud and clear, coming from the chimney. "It's just the wind. You've been alone too long." I threw a bucket of water on the fire, extinguishing the flames instantly. The cabin went dark and silent. I stood there in the living room, gripping the heavy iron poker, listening to the scratching sounds on the roof. Scritch, scratch, scritch. It sounded like long, sharp nails dragging across the shingles. Then, silence. I waited for 5 minutes. Nothing. I convinced myself I was hallucinating. Maybe it was altitude sickness. Maybe it was the whiskey. I walked to the front door to check the deadbolt one last time. It was locked. But then I noticed something under the door. A shadow was blocking the strip of light from the porch. Someone was standing right on the other side. I held my breath and leaned in close to the wood. "Go away. I have a gun." "I don't have a gun," I lied. From the other side of the door, my own voice whispered back, "Go away. I have a gun." But this time, the voice was different. It sounded hungry. It was distorted, like a corrupted audio file. Then the doorknob began to turn, slowly, deliberately. The metal groaned under the pressure. The lock held, but the door rattled in its frame. I scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp. "Stop it!" I screamed. The turning stopped. I ran to the side window, the only one without curtains. I needed to see what I was dealing with. I peered out into the snowstorm. He was standing there, on the porch. My blood ran cold. It was me. He was wearing my boots, my jeans, my jacket, but something was terribly wrong. He was taller. His arms were slightly too long for the sleeves of the jacket. His fingers hung down past his knees. And his face, it was my face, but it was smooth, like a wax mask that had started to melt. He wasn't blinking. He was just staring at me with wide, glassy eyes. Then he raised one of those long, pale hands and pressed it against the glass. He tapped the window with a finger that had too many joints. Tap, tap, tap. And then he smiled. It was a smile that stretched too wide, revealing rows of teeth that definitely were not human. He spoke, but his lips didn't move. The sound vibrated against the glass. "Let me in. It's cold out here. I want to wear your skin." I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and sprinted for the bedroom, slamming the door shut and dragging a heavy dresser in front of it. As soon as the dresser hit the wood, I heard the sound of shattering glass from the living room. Crash! The howling wind from outside rushed into the cabin, then heavy, wet steps crunching on the broken glass. Crunch, crunch, crunch. "Where are you going?" My own voice called out from the living room. "We need to finish the switch." I scrambled into the closet, burying myself under a pile of blankets. I clutched the fire poker so hard my knuckles turned white. I held my breath. The steps stopped right outside the bedroom door. The doorknob jiggled. Then a heavy weight slammed against the wood. Thud. The dresser slid an inch. Thud. "Open up," the voice said. It wasn't distorted anymore. It sounded perfect. It sounded exactly like me on my best day. Crack. The wood frame splintered. The door flew open, knocking the dresser aside like it was made of cardboard. I squeezed my eyes shut. I swung the fire poker blindly into the dark, screaming at the top of my lungs. I felt it hit something, soft, something wet. There was a screech, a high-pitched, animalistic shriek that shattered the windows. And then, darkness. The next thing I remember is the sound of a siren. A park ranger was standing over me, shaking my shoulder. "Sir? Sir, are you okay?" I sat up. I was lying on the living room floor. The window was broken, there was glass everywhere, but there was no monster, no blood, no long-limbed creature. "We got a report of a disturbance," said the ranger. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I stood up slowly. My body felt strange. My arms felt heavier, stronger. I stretched my fingers. They felt long and flexible. "I'm fine," I said. My voice was smooth, perfect. The ranger looked around. "Well, you're lucky. A storm like this can make people see things. Do you want a ride to town?" I walked over to the coat rack. I grabbed my red flannel shirt and my gray beanie. I put them on. They felt tight, a little uncomfortable, but I knew they would stretch eventually. I turned to the ranger and smiled, a smile that felt just a little too wide for my face. "No thanks," I said. "I think I'll stay. I finally feel comfortable in my own skin."